Today we're going to talk about price floors. Yesterday we talked about price ceilings. So you'll remember that supply is going upward, demand is going downward. At the intersection is where buyers and sellers come together. So quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, and it's the best price for buyers and sellers. Most profitable, most efficient. There's no shortage, there's no surplus. But sometimes the government gets involved and says it's not fair that you're charging that price or selling it for that price. And so today we're going to talk about price floors. If you want to see the price ceilings lesson, go back to yesterday's lesson and watch that. And we talked about when there's price gouging and what price actually sends a signal to buyers about what to do. Price floor is an artificial price set by the government, and it is a legal minimum. A legal minimum. A price ceiling is a legal maximum, so you cannot go below the floor. This is meant to help producers. They set it above true equilibrium. So you're selling popcorn, and buyers and sellers both agree that $3 should be the equilibrium price. But the government might step in and say it's not fair that you're selling it for $3. You should be selling it for $4. Well, as a seller, you're kind of happy about that. So you're going to supply a lot more product. But unfortunately, when people come to buy it, they just don't buy it. And so you're left with a bunch of extra, surplus. There's always a question. What happens if a seller tries to sell for a price above equilibrium? They're left with a surplus. Extra supply did not meet the demand, okay? So the key point to these things are price floors and price ceilings are artificial prices that result in surpluses and shortage, inefficiencies in the marketplace. So the next thing we look at here is minimum wage. Why is Justin Bieber so sad? Could it be because 24% of teens who want a job can't find one? Probably not. But this is a real billboard somewhere. And minimum wage for teens is higher than that of adults. And it never used to be before the minimum wage. Minimum wage is an example of a wage floor. So, question for you. Will you mow my lawn? Listen, I have to mow my lawn. I don't have a lot of time. And we have to mow it one more time probably before it stops growing for the year. And so will you mow my lawn? What's that? How much? Oh, I'm glad you asked. How much? Well, I'll pay you 5 cents an hour. Yeah, you have to push mow it. It's going to take you about an hour to do it. I'll pay you 5 cents. One shiny nickel. Agree? No? I didn't think so. How about $1? $1 an hour? I'm happy to pay you $1 an hour. No. $10 an hour? Maybe. $20 an hour? Probably. $100 an hour? Definitely. $500 an hour? It's amazing. What we just did there is we created a supply curve. The supply of your labor. Who supplies labor? Individuals do. Okay? Now, what I didn't tell you is the demand side, and that's probably what you're figuring out, that Mr. Lindquist would not be willing to pay you $100 to mow his lawn. I'm not going to do that. I might pay you 10 or 20. But what we did is in the marketplace, there would be a minimum wage. There would be an equilibrium wage that was set. So I'm going to switch over to the document camera, and we're going to do a minimum wage graph. Tomorrow, there's going to be a question on this that you have to explain the positives and negatives. So let's go do that now. I think I can do this in 5 minutes. Okay, so here's the graph. On here we have price and quantity. Quantity of workers. And price is actually the wage. As the price went up, your willingness to supply your labor went up. Supply of labor is actually individuals. Individuals. Demand for labor is done by firms, businesses. Okay? And so this is where it's kind of weird, because typically when we think supply, we're thinking about businesses. But in this case, you're the supplier. You get to sell your labor. You're supplying the work. Okay? Let's say that the equilibrium wage for unskilled labor would set on its own to $10. Look, nobody was willing to work for 5 cents. 0 people would work. At $1, $2, maybe I'd get a few desperate people, but probably not. So $10, and let's say 100 people would be employed at that. No shortage, no surplus. It's perfect. But the government's going to step in and say that's not fair. It's not fair that you're doing that and you're willing to work for $10. We need to set a floor, a wage floor or minimum wage at $15 an hour. The fight for 15. Now, at $15 an hour, suppliers of labor, the wage went up, they're pretty excited. So quantity supplied is maybe 150. Does that mean they get jobs? Does that mean they get jobs? No, not necessarily, because demanders for labor are not so excited about that. They'll only supply 50. Now, some of you are thinking, well, how greedy is that? They should just keep hiring 100 or maybe even hire more. Well, listen, business people have budgets, right? And maybe you only have $30 set aside for labor. If you only have $30 set aside for labor, if the wage is 10, you can hire 3 workers. If the wage goes up to 15, you didn't suddenly get wealthier, and so you can only hire 2 now. Is that good for the 2 workers? Yeah, but you might be the 3rd worker that loses your job. Now, what's your minimum wage? 0, okay? And so what this creates, what floors always create, are surpluses. Surplus of what? Jobs? Are there tons of jobs out there? No. Surplus of workers. Now, nobody ever calls it this, right? I don't know why. I think politicians should start using this. It's a surplus of workers. It's not unemployment. Because that's exactly what it is it's unemployment. People have lost their jobs. Now, is it bad for everybody? Is it bad for everybody? No. Look at these guys. From 0 to 50, the guys that keep their job, they got a $5 raise. Are they happy or sad? They're really happy. Happy. How about these guys, though? From 50 to 100. Yeah, they were willing to work for $10, but now the government says no. The government says it's not fair for you to work for $10. You should work for 15. You don't get the job. You happy? No. You had a job for 10. Now you lost your job for 15. And you might go to your boss and say, hey, I'll still work for 10. I'll still work for 10. It'd be illegal for your boss to hire you at that. The last thing, this group here is the 3rd group. They weren't willing to work at 10, and now the wage went up to 15, so now they're willing to work, but do they get jobs? No. So they're kind of in the same boat. Maybe they're just bored. I don't know. Okay? So minimum wage creates unemployment, a surplus. Now, I made these numbers up. Maybe it doesn't have that quite big of an effect, or maybe it has a bigger effect. But the point of this whole thing is that minimum wage does very little to solve the actual problem. Minimum wage is if it's raised gradually, it might not have a big impact. If it's raised all at once, you're going to have huge impacts, huge unemployment numbers. And you know that the simpler the solution, it doesn't always mean it's going to be effective. If it was that easy, I wish it was that easy. I really do. I wish it was that easy, because we could just tell poor countries that have low wages, we could just say, hey, why don't you just raise your minimum wage? Everybody will be rich. You know that's a silly response there. And you also probably know that there's a certain price that, why not raise the minimum wage to 100? Well, because it's going to have serious impacts. Well, the economy feels those impacts even at the smaller levels. And another key point is that the equilibrium wage would end up setting itself. No one was willing to work for a penny. No one was. Okay, and there was a wage that it set in that was about right. So be prepared to look at the pros and cons and be able to answer if you think the minimum wage should be raised to $15, agree or disagree with that. You might see that question on tomorrow's test. All right, have a great day. Do your exit ticket.